Montana Territory. Early spring of 1878, snow still clung to the ridges of the Bitterroot Mountains when Gideon Thorne found her. He had been trailing a lost calf through the dense pines west of his ranch near Lolo Creek when his horse startled at something up ahead. It was not a bear or elk. It was a woman, slumped against a tree, coat torn, boots muddy, hair tangled from a long walk through hard country. She looked up slow, wary, like a wild thing that had just learned to stand again. "Easy," Gideon said, reining in. "You hurt?" She did not answer at first. Just stared at him with eyes gone dull from cold and distance walked. Then she shook her head once. "No," her voice cracked, "but I need help." Gideon dismounted. "You got it." She did not cry, she did not reach for him. She just stood as he offered a steady hand, took it with fingers scraped and cold, and let herself be guided to his horse. "My name's Gideon Thorne," he said as he helped her mount. "Vera," she whispered. "Vera Zane." He did not ask her more, not out there in the snow-shadowed trees. Back at his ranch, Vera sat stiff and silent in the wooden chair by the fire. Her clothes were drying near the hearth. She wore one of Gideon's spare shirts, sleeves rolled up. Her hands curled around a tin cup of coffee, untouched. He knelt by the stove, stoking the flames, watching her from the edge of his sight. "You come far?" he asked gently. She flinched like even that question was too much. After a long silence, she nodded. "From Idaho." "South of Salmon." "That's near 100 miles. I walked most of it." He set the poker down. "Why?" She looked at him then, not defensive, not proud, just tired. "Because I had to." Gideon nodded once. He respected that kind of answer. She stayed the night in the small guest room. Did not sleep much. He could hear the floor creak under her pacing steps through the thin walls. Come morning, she was up early and standing at the fence line, watching the sunrise over the hills. She stayed another night, then another. By the fourth day, she was helping in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for stew, sleeves rolled up again, hair tied back. She moved quiet and precise, like someone used to doing everything herself. "You got family?" Gideon asked as he stirred the pot. Vera's jaw worked. She looked down. "I got two, my children." Gideon froze, spoon halfway to the pot. "They are not with me," she said. "I left them in Elk Bend. A widow there took them in. I could not keep them safe out there. Not with the man I was running from." He set the spoon down and leaned against the table. "Are they all right?" Vera nodded. "For now, I needed to get far enough away. I did not know where else to go." He did not ask who the man was. She would tell him when she was ready. That evening she stood by the barn brushing one of the mares. Gideon walked up beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "You are good with them," he said. "I was raised on a small farm," she replied. "Horses do not ask questions." Neither did Gideon. Not unless he needed to. But that night, as they sat by the fire again, Vera finally spoke without prompting. "He was a drifter," she said quietly. "Came through last spring. I had just lost my husband in a mining collapse. I was trying to raise Rhoda and Russ on my own. This man said he would help. Said all the right things. Then he hit me the first time. I thought maybe it was my fault. I kept thinking that." She looked up at Gideon with eyes that had been dry too long. "I am not good at love," she said. "I do not trust right. I pull away too fast. I get angry when someone tries to be kind." Gideon watched her a long moment. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then we will learn together," he said. "If you will stay." She blinked. "I mean it," he said. "You do not have to explain or apologize. Just stay. Let us figure it out slow." Vera stared at him like she did not know what to do with a man who meant his words. She swallowed. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not. I have 2 children." "I figured we would go get them when you are ready." Her voice cracked. "You would do that, of course." Vera looked down, hands trembling slightly in her lap. Then she nodded once. I will stay. From that day, something shifted. She started helping more mending tack, tending the chickens, riding out with Gideon to check on the cattle. She was quiet, but she laughed once when a goat chased him out of the barn, and that laugh short, surprised, warm, stuck in his chest like a fire catching. Gideon never pressed. He did not touch her unless she reached first, but he was always close, always steady. One morning she rode out with him before dawn. They sat side by side on a bluff overlooking the valley. I want to bring them home, she said. He nodded. We leave tomorrow. Vera turned her face toward him, wind lifting her hair. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked. He looked at her, eyes steady. Because you deserve it. She looked away, but she was smiling. The next morning they rode for Elk Bend. They reached the widow's house near sundown. Rhoda, 8 years old, came running first, her dark hair bouncing. Russ, 6, followed slower, blinking up at Gideon like he was studying a stranger. Vera went down to her knees in the dust. She pulled them both close. Her shoulders shook. Gideon stood back, letting her have the moment. That night, they stayed in the back of the widow's house, and Vera lay between her children, holding them like she had not dared to in months. She looked over at Gideon once, where he sat near the hearth. He gave her a small nod. She mouthed, "Thank you," and he smiled, just enough. They rode back to Montana 2 days later, with Rhoda and Russ in tow, and something steadier growing between them than either had known how to hope for. They were not in love yet, but they were close, and Vera had stayed. A month passed before the snow melted off the last of the north-facing gullies. By then, the children had found their rhythm. Rhoda took to feeding the hens each morning without being asked, and Russ spent long hours trailing after Gideon as he moved through the pastures, quiet and watchful, like he was learning the land by feel. Vera watched them from the porch most days, a mending basket at her feet, needle moving steady through worn seams. One evening, after the sun dipped behind the low hills and the cattle had been driven in, Gideon unsaddled his horse and found Vera in the barn, brushing out the winter coat from the old draft gelding. She didn't startle when he stepped in, just looked over her shoulder. "You ever think about building a second room?" she asked. He leaned against the stall door. "That your way of saying I snore?" "No," she said, "just thinking. Rhoda and Russ might need their own space if we stay through summer." His brow lifted. "You mean to stay that long?" She hesitated. "I'm thinking on it." Gideon stepped closer, picked up a brush, and worked along the gelding's flank. "We could take down the back wall of the house. Add 2 rooms easy. I got the lumber in the shed." "You do all that?" He met her eyes steady. "You and the young'uns need more room." "That's reason enough." Vera nodded once, then went back to brushing, her braid falling over one shoulder. She didn't speak again until the horse was done and the tools were hung back on their hooks. "I used to think roots were dangerous," she said. "That staying anywhere too long meant you gave someone a place to strike." Gideon didn't move. "That's still how you feel?" "I don't know," she said. "But this place, it's quiet, it listens. I've never had that before." He didn't answer. Just reached and gently took her hand, brushing his thumb along the calluses at her palm. She didn't pull away. The next morning, Rhoda dragged an old quilt out to the front yard and laid it flat in the grass. Vera came out with a tin pail of blackberries they'd picked the day before, and the 3 of them, mother, daughter, son, sat cross-legged, squinting at the bright sky. Gideon watched from the fence line, a hammer slung through his belt, thinking how odd it was to feel full just from the sound of children laughing. Later that day, while Russ napped and Rhoda pulled weeds from the garden row, Vera crossed the pasture where Gideon was setting stakes for the addition. "You need another pair of hands?" she asked. He looked up. "Always." She knelt beside him, took one of the stakes and held it firm as he drove it in. The sun was strong and her cheeks were pink where it touched her. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "In what way, if we build that room? If we stay, what does that make us?" He didn't answer right away, just drove in another stake. Then, "I think it makes us something we're still figuring out, but I know I want you here, not just for the children." "For you?" She looked at him, not startled, just still. "I don't want to guess anymore," she said. "If I put down roots here, you'd best be sure." "I am," he said. "I was the first day you let me help." She looked down at her hands. "I ain't good at love, Gideon. I get cold in the wrong moments. I forget to say the right words." He took her hand again, same as in the barn. "Then we'll learn together." She nodded slowly, eyes shining but dry. "All right." That night they sat out on the porch after the children had gone to sleep. The stars were out and the coyotes were starting up their distant song. Vera leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder, no words between them. Just warmth and the slow, steady rhythm of a life mending itself. Piece by piece, in the dark, her fingers found his and stayed there. The addition took 12 days. Gideon worked from first light until the shadows stretched long, and Vera was beside him through most of it, holding boards, steadying ladders, squinting against sawdust. Rhoda and Russ helped where they could, ferrying nails in a tin coffee can, sweeping wood shavings off the porch with a broom that barely reached past their knees. On the 13th morning, the new room stood finished, clean and square and smelling of fresh pine. Rhoda wandered in first, barefoot on the plank floor. "It's ours?" she asked, glancing back at her mother. Vera nodded. "Yours and Russ's, yes." The girl's smile was small but certain, like she'd been waiting to belong to something again. That night, when the children were asleep behind their new door, Vera stepped out onto the porch where Gideon sat with one boot propped against the post, carving a length of branch smooth with his penknife. "You've done good work," she said. He looked up. "Wasn't just me." She leaned against the railing, arms folded under her shawl. They slept easy, first time in a long while. "I noticed." She was quiet for a while, watching the wind roll over the grass. Then, without looking at him, she said, "I used to pick chokecherries with my mother along the creek back home. She'd mash them for syrup, always said bitter made the sweet stronger." Gideon paused in his carving. "You miss her. She died when I was 16. Fever took her fast." He didn't speak. "She wasn't soft," Vera went on. "She didn't coo or fuss, but she showed up, every day, no matter what the world tried." "She sounds like someone worth remembering." Vera nodded. "She wouldn't have liked me running. But she'd understand it. Maybe she'd be proud of where you ran to." Vera turned then, met his eyes. "You think this is where I was headed all that way?" "No," Gideon said, "but maybe it's where you were meant to stop." She came closer, slow. "You still sure?" "I haven't changed once," he said. Her hand found his shoulder, light but certain. "Then I reckon I need to learn how to stay, same way I learned how to run by doing it." Gideon stood, knife folded and tucked away. He touched her cheek, thumb brushing just below her eye. "I won't push," he said, "but I'll be here as long as you are." Vera leaned into him, arms around his waist, head against his chest. "That's the kind of love I never knew to want." He held her without words. The porch creaked beneath their feet, and somewhere inside, Russ turned in his sleep. By morning, Gideon found her in the root cellar, sorting through last year's potatoes with a practiced hand. "I want to plant," she said. "Come spring proper, not just a corner garden. Rows, beans, cabbage, maybe squash." He crouched beside her, lifting a soft potato to toss it aside. "We'll need to clear more ground." "I can do that." "We'll do it together." She nodded, brushing her hands on her apron. "I want it to be ours." "It already is." Vera sat back on her heels, hair falling loose from its knot. "I don't know how to build a full life from scratch." "You don't have to," Gideon said, lifting her hand. "We've already started." She looked down at their joined fingers, then up at him. "You're not afraid I'll break it? I'm not afraid of a damn thing with you beside me." That night, she didn't sleep in the guest room. They lay quiet in Gideon's bed, the windows open to the breeze. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm curled around her back. The lantern burned low, and there was nothing to say, because everything had already been chosen. She had stayed, and he had waited, and now they would learn the rest together. The first real rain came on an afternoon thick with the scent of crushed sage and wet dust. The sky cracked open in a burst, and Vera was caught halfway between the barn and the house with a pail of feed swinging from one hand. Gideon stepped out just long enough to meet her halfway and took the pail without a word. They ran the last stretch together, soaked through by the time they reached the porch. Inside, Rhoda and Russ were on the floor, drawing horses on scraps of brown paper with bits of charcoal Vera had given them from the stove. Russ had drawn one with wings. Rhoda was trying to convince him that horses didn't fly. Gideon hung the wet coats near the stove and handed Vera a dry towel from the shelf. She looked down at herself, shirt stuck to her back, skirts clinging to her legs, then back up at him, her lips twitching in silent amusement. "Well," she said, "I reckon that's the most excitement we've had all week." He handed her the towel. "You saying I'm not exciting, I'm saying you're steady," she replied, drying her face. "Which is better?" The rain kept on through the evening, drumming soft and steady on the roof. The children fell asleep early, curled in their shared bed with the quilt pulled high. Vera stood at the window for a long while after, watching the dark shapes of the trees sway in the stormlight. "I had a dream last week," she said suddenly, her voice quiet. Gideon looked up from the tin of tobacco he was packing. "What kind of dream?" "I was back in Elk Bend, but I wasn't scared. I was just walking along the river with Rhoda and Russ. They had baskets full of apples, and I wasn't looking over my shoulder." He didn't speak right away. "I woke up before we reached the water," she added. "But I remembered it. I never remember dreams." He set the tin down and leaned forward. "You think that's something you want now, to go back?" She shook her head. "No, I think it's something I needed to let go of, that fear. That weight." He watched her a moment. "You want to plant apples?" She turned, surprised, into laughter. "You think I can grow a whole orchard?" "Not in a year," he said, "but maybe one tree to start." Vera folded her arms across her chest and leaned her hip against the table. "You always say yes this easy." "No," he said, "just with you." She stepped closer. "You don't know how much I needed someone who'd say yes without asking why." "I trust your reasons," he said. "Even when I don't know them." She looked down at her hands, the lines across her knuckles deep and rough. "I never thought I'd be able to raise them anywhere decent again. I thought I'd always be running." "You're not," Gideon said. "You're home." She looked up at him. "Say that again." "You're home." She came to him then, arms slipping around his waist, face pressed close beneath his collarbone. He rested his chin atop her head, the rain softening outside, the stove clicking as the heat settled. "I want to marry you," she said into his shirt. He didn't move. "You sure?" She pulled back just enough to look at him. "I've lived through lies and quick promises. This isn't that." He nodded once, his hand brushing her cheek. "Then I want that too, plain and quiet, no fuss." Vera smiled. "I've had enough of fuss." They were married 5 days later. The preacher rode in from Missoula, a man with a long beard and a voice that carried. They held the ceremony under the cottonwoods by the creek, just the 4 of them and the preacher. Rhoda picked wildflowers for her mother's hair, and Russ wore a vest stitched from an old feed sack that Vera had mended. When the vows were said, Vera didn't cry. She just held Gideon's hand tightly, her jaw steady, her eyes sure. They shared bread and coffee afterward, sitting on a wool blanket with the children between them. The preacher blessed the meal and then rode back out before dusk. That night, with the stars clear above and the house quiet, Vera lay beside him beneath the quilt she'd pieced herself. She traced the seam along his shoulder with the tip of her finger. "I still don't know if I'm good at love," she whispered. Gideon reached for her hand, brought it to his lips. "You're good at staying. That's enough for me." She smiled in the dark. "Then I reckon we've learned something." They slept with the windows open, the breeze soft through the cotton curtains, the sound of frogs rising from the creek. And for the first time in her life, Vera Zane Thorne didn't dream of running. By late June, the fields had taken to green in earnest. The squash vines curled thick through the soil, and the beans climbed their poles like they'd been waiting all winter for the chance. Vera kept a close eye on the garden, though she never hovered. She worked with purpose, hands in the dirt, sun on her back, her apron smudged with earth by midday. Gideon watched her sometimes from the edge of the corral, a quiet satisfaction settling into his chest like a stone warmed by fire. One morning, as she knelt in the rows checking for beetles, Gideon came down with his rifle slung across his shoulder and a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth tucked under one arm. "You planning to shoot the cabbage?" she asked, shading her eyes against the sun. He crouched beside her and handed her the parcel without a word. Inside was a set of bone-handled carving knives she'd admired weeks back in town but never mentioned since. She traced the smooth curve of one handle, then looked up at him. "You remembered." "Course I did." She set the knives gently in her lap. "You think I need more reasons to love you? You're the one who said we'd learn it slow." She leaned over and kissed his cheek, then stood and brushed off her skirt. "Well, I'm learning fast today." That evening, Vera took the knives to the kitchen and set to slicing onions and dried venison for stew. Rhoda helped wash the carrots, and Russ, sitting on a stool with his feet swinging, counted each clove of garlic aloud with deep concentration. After supper, the children played outside until the light failed. Vera and Gideon sat on the porch, the empty bowls still warm in their hands. The scent of sage from the hills drifted in with the night breeze. "Russ found a feather this morning," Vera said. "Called it a crow's. Said it meant we were protected." Gideon glanced toward the barn where the boy had tied the feather to a post with a bit of string. "He might be right. He's less afraid now," she said. "Rhoda, too. I think they believe this life will hold," he nodded. "It will. I made my choice when I married you," she said, "but it's the days after that matter, and I keep choosing you." Gideon reached over and laced their fingers together. "I'll keep being worth it." That fall the garden gave more than expected. Vera preserved what she could: jars of pickled beets, dried corn strung on twine, squash cured and stored beneath the floor. Rhoda helped label each jar with bits of paper held by wax, while Russ built small cities out of empty crates behind the stove. As the nights cooled, Gideon started a fire most mornings before the sun crested the eastern hills. Vera would come in from checking the henhouse with her cheeks pink from the cold, and he'd hold out a warm mug without needing to speak. One morning she stood in the doorway longer than usual, watching the light move across the floorboards. "I want to teach Rhoda her letters," she said. "And Russ too, when he's ready. I can write some, enough to get by. But if we can do more for them, we should." Gideon nodded, drawing on his boots. "I'll speak to the traveling teacher next time he comes through. Maybe he can leave us a primer." She crossed the room and laid her hand on his chest. "You know what I never told you?" "What's that?" "I don't wake up afraid anymore." He covered her hand with his. "That's the only kind of miracle I ever prayed for." That winter came early with snow that piled thick and quiet. They kept close to the stove, and Gideon read to the children from a Bible with frayed corners. Vera mended clothes and taught Rhoda to stitch, while Russ helped split kindling with a hatchet no larger than a handspan. One night, as the wind howled and the windows rattled, Vera sat with Gideon by the hearth while the children slept. She rested her head on his shoulder, her voice low. "There was a time I thought I'd spend my life waiting for the next storm. I never imagined a man would build a home around me instead." He kissed the top of her head. "You didn't just survive, Vera. You built something stronger than any storm." By spring, the children were reading simple words from a worn primer the teacher had left behind. Rhoda read aloud while Russ tried to follow, his finger pressed to each letter. Vera sat with them every morning after chores, her voice patient, her eyes bright with quiet pride. One afternoon, Gideon walked in from the field, dirt on his hands, and found them all at the table, books open, flour dusted on the edge of Vera's sleeve where she'd started bread before the lesson. He stood there a moment, just watching them, until Vera looked up. "You all right?" she asked. He crossed the room and kissed her brow. "I've never been better." That summer they planted more. Not just food, but flowers, wild lupine and black-eyed Susans along the fence, a row of lavender by the porch. The land, like the people on it, had softened. And in the quiet moments when the children played in the creek, or the wind moved through the cottonwoods, Vera would turn to Gideon, her eyes steady, her smile easy. She no longer waited for things to fall apart, because they had already come through the worst. And here, in this house they'd built with calloused hands and earned trust, they'd found not just safety, but joy. They grew old in that valley, the garden expanding year by year, the orchard taking root with the first sapling blooming after 3 seasons. Rhoda grew into a tall, capable woman with ink on her fingers and a sharp wit. Russ became a quiet, clever boy who carved toys for the younger children of passing neighbors. And Vera, once worn thin by the road behind her, stood firm in the life she'd chosen. She did not run. She did not falter. She loved with both feet on the ground. Gideon never stopped watching her work with the same quiet awe he'd felt the first time she held herself upright in his barn. And she never stopped reaching for his hand, even when the years turned their hair silver and their steps slower. They sat together each evening, side by side, watching the sun settle low behind the trees. They had survived, and they had made it home.